Political communication is an important aspect in our current social age. Political communication is defined as a based on actions of political institutions which aim to promote those institutions and should concentrate on four areas: propaganda, electoral analysis, mass communication, and the relationship between media and public opinion. Structural functional approach defines political communication as a process of communicative actions which influences the functioning of political system. Political communication is focused on how information spreads and influences politics and political matters. Political communication is only political if the content and purpose is, not who is giving it. Often, political communication is used to persuade a group of people or inform a group of people of a certain subject. Political communication has verbal, written, and visual representations such as clothing or things that develop a certain image. People who use political communication often use social scientific techniques or devices to understand its audience and how to reach them. Political communication plays an extremely important role in our society. According to Jürgen Habermas, the things communicated are often legislative decisions, political programs, court rulings or verdicts, administrative measures and decrees, guidelines, and policies or results from different types of institutionalized deliberation and negotiation processes. These are all important aspects of political communication in our days. Is it important to let a country's citizens know what new laws are being enacted and how it affects them? Court rulings are extremely important to be communicated to the public to ensure that all rulings are fair and equal. It is important for taxpayers to know and understand what their tax dollars are being spent on. Knowing what goes on in governments helps prevent corruption and is extremely important for transparency. A quote from John Adams says, "Liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people who have a right and desire to know." Events such as televised debates, government audits, and social media help politicians voice their opinions on and inform the public on such matters. This information is usually spread through news media and outlets. This, however, can be a problem because such media outlets can provide a bias or skew such information. For example, a news media outlet may only report certain aspects of a story or skew such information. There's both verbal and non-verbal communications when talking about political communication. Verbal communication, politicians usually use speeches, slogans, or other forms of written outlines to help convey their message. They often change their language for different audiences. For example, they may talk about bringing jobs to a certain area, or when talking to a company, they may say they can provide some form of payment. Politicians use slogan to help convey their message to the people, and therefore helping them remember them. Nonverbal communication is often described in many ways. It is shown through clothing, such as wearing patriotic clothing, red, white, and blue. In signs and messages on the streets, they use patriotic colors, such as red, white, and blue again, bold font, and patriotic symbols such as stars or a flag, so on and so forth. When talking, politicians often use hand gestures and facial expressions to help communicate and convey emotions. One important example in our history is the Kennedy and Nixon debate. As shown here, Kennedy and Nixon were shown the first televised political debate. Kennedy spent hours preparing for the debate, tanning beforehand and reading note cards on specific messages or questions that may have been asked. Nixon, on the other hand, showed very little preparation and was recently hospitalized before the debate and was shown sickly throughout the debate. During the debate, Nixon was often slouched over and shown sweaty, which caused a negative view Americans. A test was shown, and people that listened via the radio believed that Nixon had won the debate. However, during that time, televisions were more prominent than ever before, and people who watched during the television said that Kennedy had won in a landslide. Even after Nixon had faced such flaws, people were unable to get the initial image of Nixon being non-confident and uncomfortable from the debate out of their head. These instances of political communication are extremely important in our society and will be further discussed.
Now that we have learned what political communication is and the history behind it, we will explore the strategies of verbal communication used in political communication. Communication is extremely important in many aspects of our life. In politics and public administration, communication is everything. Think of it this way. Politics without communication is like having blood without veins or arteries. It's not really going anywhere. Communication guides public change and reform, helps persuade decision makers to enact change, helps disseminate information, and helps public administrators work effectively. In order to do that successfully, political communication must focus on persuasive communication and mass communication. According to Real Communication and Introduction, persuasion is the process of influencing others' attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors on a given topic. A good persuasive speaker should understand their audience's dispositions, needs, and what is relevant. This is accomplished through the three means of persuasion, or forms of rhetorical proof: ethos, logos, and pathos. Persuasion is a huge part of politics because a politician's main goal is to persuade his or her audience and ultimately vote for them. Their goals and beliefs are pursued through persuasion. Persuasion helps enhance the audience's outlook on the politician. A good persuasive speaker is able to make their audience feel confident in what they believe and who they are as a person. Now that we have learned about how persuasive communication is used and appreciated in political communication, we will see how mass communication strengthens political communication. According to Real Communication and Introduction, mass communication is the process in which a person, group of people, or organization sends a message through a channel of communication to a large group of anonymous and heterogeneous people and organizations. Over the years, mass communication has become larger scale because of new technology and social media outlets. Mediated communication is the core of mass communication, helping the message spread around the world in just a few minutes. There are some obvious advantages and disadvantages in mass communication today, but if used correctly, a political campaign or any type of advertising or publishing can really take off and have a powerful impact around the world. Mass communication plays a lot of different roles in politics, political campaigns, and elections. Because mass communication is most often shared through media, it has an effect on the world that other types of communications cannot compare to. It educates voters on how to exercise their democratic rights. It provides a platform for the political parties and candidates to communicate their message to the electorate, and it provides results and monitors vote counting. Of course, mass communication can have some disadvantages. A lot of what is seen on television, social media outlets, and the news is filtered. What is seen on the media needs to be taken with a grain of salt because we cannot be sure of where the source is coming from. Since mass communication is such on a large scale, the preciseness or exactness decreases. Overall, mass communication can have a huge impact on political communication, good or bad. For a visual aid, we will now watch a short video on the 5 steps of mass communication. We will then look at a diagram that breaks down the components of persuasive communication. These 2 visuals are great reminders of the most important components of mass and persuasive communication. This visual aid shows us the 4 steps to being good at persuasive communication. Step 1 is to establish credibility and trust in yourself. Step 2 is to find a basis of common ground with you and your audience. Step 3 is to provide vivid proof. And lastly, step 4 is to connect at an emotional level. Persuasive communication and mass communication are just 2 aspects of political communication I chose to highlight. There are, of course, many other aspects that determine whether or not a person may be a good political speaker. Let's refer back to our introduction video to provide a great example. There are many similar verbal communication styles between the candidates. For example, their tone of voice is very sincere and loud. They speak in high language and do not use any slang or low language. They have to constantly be using the communication accommodation theory, as it is very important for them to adapt their language and nonverbal language to the person, group, or context. You do not hear many politicians using hate speech in their political campaigns or speeches, as they want people of every culture and background to support them. These are just some verbal communication strategies that many politicians and public administrators use. While verbal communication is a very big and important part of political communication, nonverbal communication is just as important. Next, Claire will educate us on the nonverbal communication used in political communication.
Hi, I'm Claire, and I'm going to be talking to you about the nonverbal aspects that are commonly seen in political communications. So, first of all, various studies have shown that that nonverbal communication and a person's visual impression can be much more important than what the person is actually saying. One famous example of this is in the popularly televised first ever political debate that Vince talked about earlier, the Richard Nixon versus John F. Kennedy debate. This video that I'm going to show you briefly talks about how the appearance of each of the men ultimately impacted the way that the election turned out, and how the appearance of the men played the most important factor over what the people were actually saying.
Goodbye Mayberry, hello Camelot. In 1960, CBS bumped the beloved Andy Griffith Show to make room for TV's very first broadcast of a presidential debate.
The Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy. In freedom in the next generation, Hong or the communists going to be successful? That's the great issue. Vice President Richard M. Nixon.
I subscribe completely to the spirit that Senator Kennedy has expressed tonight.
Senator John F. Kennedy and Vice President Richard Nixon argued over the Soviet Union and civil rights, but the debate is perhaps best remembered not for what was said, but how the candidates looked. Legendary producer Don Hewitt recalls talking to the candidates backstage.
I said, do you want any makeup? Now, Kennedy, who had been campaigning in an open convertible, looking tan and fit, this guy was a matinee idol. He said, no, I want. And I said, Nixon, if you want some makeup. Having heard Kennedy say no, he said no, and he came out, I looked at him on camera, and he looked like death warmed over.
And how they looked impacted voters. Here's how Bob Dole remembers it.
I was listening to it on the radio, and I thought Nixon was doing a great job. Then I saw the TV clips the next morning. The guy, he was sick. He didn't look well. Kennedy was young, articulate, and sort of wiped him out.
Most historians now say that debate forever changed politics, and not everyone thought that was a good thing. Goodbye Mayberry, hello.
So as you can see, that video talked about how the different things like facial expression, clothing, hand gestures, body language, and the posture of the two men ultimately impacted the way that they were perceived on television by the voters. Some important things that I just talked about: posture, so standing up straight, making eye contact, knowing what you're going to talk about, appearing confident with your hands, speaking with your hands, not slouching over, wearing colors such as red, white, and blue, looking professional. These are all things that impact the way that a person perceives you and the way and the impression that you're going to make on them ultimately. Body language becomes especially important when a political leader is communicating with someone of a different culture or a different political leader. They want to make sure that they are aware of different social norms and cultural things when they enter different cultures, so that they are sure not to appear rude, offend anyone, or possibly even an entire culture if they did something really outrageous, or they appear impolite to different people. So one other important aspect that gets into posture is similar to the power pose that we discussed in class. When a political leader stands with their hands on their hips, chest exposed, they're confident and looking straight at their audience, making eye contact, that makes them appear confident and trustworthy, and it makes voters want to listen to them and believe what they're saying and want to trust them. Whereas if a politician stands with like their arms crossed, covers their mouth, or mumbles, they're not making a good impression, then it makes them appear uninformed, untrustworthy, not confident. People don't want to trust them or listen to them. They don't want to have they don't want to put their faith into someone like that. That becomes increasingly important when you're talking about national emergencies or different things that people, they're worried about their own safety, they're worried about their families, their friends, they want to trust that the person that's in charge of them is informed, they know what's going on, they are confident that they're going to lead the country in a positive manner. So nonverbal communication is one of the most important factors that politicians can do in political communication, because the first impression or the visual impression makes a much bigger impact than what the person is actually saying.
It's hard to ignore that in today's society, media plays a large role in political communication. In fact, electronic media is about the only way that a lot of political communication is dispersed. Newspapers and written things aren't as common anymore. One of the great examples we've seen, as mentioned by Vince and Claire, is the Kennedy-Nixon debate. This really changed the game for all of political communication. Because once you start using media and electronics, you not only have to worry about your sequencing of words and your syntax, but your body language and what your voice sounds like and making sure you sound articulated. Another example is the next televised debate after the Kennedy-Nixon, which included Gerald Ford. Now, unfortunately, he misspoke some information, and so there was false information out there, and this basically ruined his reputation and cost him the election. So the Kennedy-Nixon debate is a great example of not only how media can affect communication, but also what types of media can affect your communication and the elections themselves. So television is a really big main channel for political communication. Debates, speeches, the polls, and opinion pieces are often communicated through the TV. Now this is wonderful because it's so much faster than the newspapers. Before media became big, electronic media that is, people would wake up at dawn, wait for their paper to see the front page of who would be the next president. Now we have access to live voting, so as each state closes their polls and tallies their results, we can see who won for each state, and we get live feed on who has the most popular vote and who's behind. And news channels often use this information to change their reports and change their articles. So this is often beneficial for them. It helps them provide more information on which candidate is in the lead or which candidate is falling behind. And it keeps the people updated as they can reach a large amount of people as well. Social media is unavoidably another great way of communicating, especially for political communication. Now, social media can often be tricky because there are lots of ways that it can be manipulated in ways that can harm a campaign. One of the benefits is that there is so many different platforms for social media and communication through those forms. Popularly, there is Facebook, and there's Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn. So politicians have access to all of these accounts and are able to target lots of different ages and lots of different demographics, and people from all over the country and people all over the world are able to keep up with political conversations happening within the US. Now, social media can be used against a politician. People can make fake accounts and impersonate politicians, and it becomes hard to distinguish which one is real and which one is fake. They can also take information out of context. So if someone takes an excerpt from an official political speech and puts it on the internet, they can change the way that it's interpreted. And also, over the internet, as we discussed in class, it's hard to determine tone and inflection. So words can be taken and skewed a different way than they were intended. People can also make a comment on a political post or repost something in a negative way, and then all of their friends see it, and then if someone else shares it, then all their friends see it. And something we can't ignore about the internet is that once something's out there, it can't be taken back. So politicians have to be very deliberate about what they put online because there's no taking it back. It's out there forever. One thing you also have to watch out for when looking at any media, electronic or not, is bias. So it's important when you're getting any information about anything, but specifically political communication, that you check the source it's coming from. You have to research the author and check and see if that site or company they belong to has any open political affiliations, because that can skew the information that they're giving you. And it's very important that you determine if information is reliable and accurate before you use it to make decisions in your own life. So in conclusion, political communication is very tricky business, and using electronic media such as television or social media can be very beneficial when it's done the right way. It can make or break your campaign, so it's very important that politicians put a lot of work into it. It requires a lot of knowledge on how to use each platform and careful planning, but it can definitely be very effective in winning an election.
There are many other factors that affect communication in politics, such as gender, age, race, sexual orientation, culture, and globalization. The first category, gender and race, in political communication, the politician has to skew and adjust their topic in order to adjust their scope to certain genders and races. Politicians have to communicate differently. For example, because unemployment rates are high in minorities, a politician might discuss and address the benefits for minorities in regards to unemployment in order to pull that part, in order to get more of a pull from minorities in that category. The next is age. One big part about age is the propaganda in social media versus newspapers. In this day and age, most young people refer to social media as their primary news source. In order to get a higher pull from young people, it is important that politicians use propaganda in avenues like social media, such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. In order to get a higher pull from older people in the community, a politician could emphasize things like retirement benefits and 401k plans. One example of poor social media use by a politician is Donald Trump. Trump's tweet about NFL players kneeling during the anthem came off as overpowering, immature, and biased. So these NFL players kneeled during the national anthem, and Roger Goodell tweeted, Donald Trump tweeted, Roger Goodell of the NFL just put out a statement trying to justify the total disrespect certain players show to our country. Tell them to stand. This was not a smart move by Donald Trump because he used social media to emotionally act out. This was viewed by the American public as a very immature and bad gesture. The next is globalization. International relations are crucial to leadership in the U.S. It is really important for politicians to find the delicate balance between strength, over-aggression, and irrational behavior. This comic right here describes the relationship between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Donald Trump in this situation has acted immaturely and has demonstrated poor international relations. Sexual orientation. If political campaigns back same-sex marriage, it helps them in order to draw higher polls from those who support same-sex marriage. The next is power in political communication. It is very important for politicians to find the delicate balance between looking powerful but not too powerful. Across the world, this is different internationally because different political positions are different from country to country. For example, UK has a king and a queen, and it's more of a power position than the President of the United States. Any appearance of tyranny will result in backlash from the community. And this picture demonstrates the President of the United States acting as a king, and that is viewed very poorly by the community. Now we'll kind of go over all the points we made throughout this presentation as an overview. First of all, there is no politics without communication. Without communication, politics as a whole wouldn't be able to take off in America or anywhere around the world. Politics are the ultimate stage for being judged on communication. Because the influences of social media and things like television spread anything around the world in just a matter of seconds, politics are the number one easiest way to be judged on communication, and everybody's watching it at all points. Persuasion. In politics, persuasion is the main goal. And the power of advertising and propaganda, it can truly make or break your political campaign. Nonverbal communication. Things such as physical appearance can make or break a politician's communication. Things like posture, clothing, facial expressions, and hand gestures are really important because if they aren't presented in a likable way, it can make or break the outlook of the public. Now verbal communication. Things like tone of voice, volume, clarity, and assurance in speech are ways to properly communicate. Also, politeness and pauses in speech are crucial to any speech a politician gives because it makes them come across as confident and sure of themselves. Influence of the media. Media plays a big part in political communication because that is the way the word is spread to the general public. We have to be careful when we interpret things put out by the media because they are potentially skewed and the sources are unsure oftentimes. Forms of media outlet are TV, newspapers, and social media. Intended audience also plays a big part. It is important that politicians adjust their speech and topic stance based on an intended audience. For example, race, gender, and sexual orientation are 3 things that politicians have to adjust their speaking points towards. Now we'll watch a short video as an example of effective political communication.
To come together as one united people. I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. It's time.
Yes, we can. America, we have come so far. We have seen so much, but there's so much more to do.
I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me.
This is our moment. This is our time to put our people back to work and open doors of opportunity for our kids.
For those who have chosen not to support me in the past, of which there were a few people, I'm reaching out to you for your guidance and your help so that we can work together and unify our great country.
So tonight, let us ask ourselves, if our children should live to see the next century, if my daughters should be so lucky to live as long as Ann Nixon Cooper, what change will they see? What progress will we have made? This is our chance to answer that call. This is our moment. This is our time to put our people back to work and open doors of opportunity for our kids, to restore prosperity and promote the cause of peace, to reclaim the American dream and reaffirm that fundamental truth that out of many we are one, that while we breathe, we hope, and where we are met with cynicism and doubt, and those who tell us that we can't, we will respond with that timeless creed that sums up the spirit of a people. Yes, we can.
It's a movement comprised of Americans from all races, religions, backgrounds, and beliefs who want and expect our government to serve the people, and serve the people it will.
Thank you. God bless you. And may God bless the United States of America.
This example of political communication is effective because they use clean, strong physical appearance, effective verbal skills, effective and widespread propaganda and advertisement. They use the media, and when controlling the media, you can only control what you can control. Effective political communication adjusts for the intended audience. This last example was effective political communication because it presented a feeling of unity, strength, and accomplishment.